Hey, if you are an occupational therapist and looking to become the top choice to getting an offer on a position that you want, I'm going to share with you some of the top questions that you could be asking to show that you're interested in a position. My name is Huang with Hand Therapy Secrets, and I am here to help occupational therapists get the job that they want in hand therapy. Now, just because I'm talking specifically about hand therapy, that doesn't mean that as an occupational therapist, you couldn't apply this to getting a job in an acute care setting, in a rehab setting, or whatever, to start to essentially build your career towards hand therapy, right? So I did several other interviews in terms of I did several other videos in terms of the 7 major tips when it comes to interview etiquette. And there's also a video on post interviews that I think is really key in terms of showing up and saying that you are interested in a position. But in this particular video, I'm gonna share with you, it was number 4 in the 7 tips that I shared on being engaged. So this video is very specific in terms of what questions you can be asking to show that you're interested in the position. Now, if you're interviewing for the position, you're interested, right? If you're interviewing for it, you're interested. And if you go to another interview, you're more than interested, right? So let's go over a little bit in terms of, what kind of questions you could be asking to show that you're engaged. So it's not that you couldn't ask any question, right? You want to be very intentional in terms of asking the questions that will show that you're interested, right? So in a way, it goes back to like doing your research. Don't ask basic questions. Don't ask basic questions of what hours would I be working or what time is your facility open. You could have looked that up on the website. Like, what kind of hours, unless it's a huge place and they're, looking for different shifts or whatever. Like, I totally get it. But basically, you want to be intentional with the kind of questions that you're asking, not basic questions, all right? So, for example, what are some good questions to ask the employer at the end of the interview process to express interest? At the end of it, you literally could say, I'm really interested in this position, right? It doesn't have to be a question. You can tell them you're really interested. And you know what is really key? You can show them you're interested by doing a follow-up. Now, there's 2 ways to go about questions. You can show your engagement throughout the interview process. Like, it should be a banter back and forth. And you could be asking your questions, like in terms of culture of a place, in terms of growth and learning. I'm sharing with you 2 of my major core values, right? 2 of my major core values is essentially the culture of the place, right? And one of the things that I value the most in the people who come and work with me are people who value growth and learning. So I'm telling you essentially what I value. When you interview with a company, you want to learn and know what they value, right? And you can also demonstrate what you value. So if you value culture, like, I was working at this other place and they didn't have a lot of team commitment, blah, 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 and you're looking for some of that, you can ask more of a culture question. If learning and growth is really important to you, you can ask growth and learning types of questions. But in terms of interest, you can show interest just by asking questions throughout, right? You can also say this. Sounds like everything I'm looking for in terms of growing myself in my career, I'm looking forward to being a part of your team, right? Blah, blah, blah. Or you can say, I'm looking to, I'm really interested in the position. I'm looking forward to continuing the growth and reputation of your company or your department, blah, blah, blah. So you can actually express that interest. You can also ask questions, like I said, throughout the process. Let's say, for example, how could I best prepare for the role if you were to select me for the position, right? Here's another one. If you were to offer me the position, how soon would you need me to start? Right? What's your onboarding process look like for me to be successful in my role? These are just some examples of questions. Let's see. So far, if you're talking to someone, and they give you clinical questions. They give you clinical questions and you answer it based on what you potentially would do. Let's say, for example, what would you do in a case of a thumb fracture, blah, blah, blah. They're just testing your clinical knowledge or your clinical critical thinking skills, right? And one thing that you could potentially do after your answer is give them a question in terms of, if you're talking to someone clinical, you could say, well, this is what I would do, blah, 1, 2, and 3. I'd be really curious to know what your process is. Do your therapists follow a certain type of protocol based on the lead therapist, or are they free to do what they normally like to do? Just in a little example, if they ask you a splint question of what would you do, how long would it take you to do a particular splint, you can say, well, normally, it would take me X amount of time if I was learning a splint that I wasn't really sure of. I know the splinting principles, but sometimes with splints I've never done before, it's going to take me a little bit longer. And other splints that I'm really comfortable with would take me a little bit shorter. What is your process for your therapist in your department? Is there a set time frame, or do you allow it based on skill level? These are just example questions, because that engagement throughout the interview process, can allow you to ask all the questions you need to show your engagement, to show that you're interested in the position, right? And let's see, what's another one? If they ask you about like working in a team, or working on a body part, one of the things I always encourage occupational therapists to do is like see about treating more than what you've already done, if that's something you're interested in doing. So when I interviewed once, I talked to them about, well, I've always worked with the whole arm, hand, wrist, elbow, and shoulder. I'd love to know how, do you allow your occupational therapists that are currently here to take on cases, such as that, or is there a defined line between the PT and the OT? Right? You can also set the stage for what you're looking for and what you want to do and how you want to grow and develop them, yourself, but also their department. So these are just key examples of questions to show your engagement. Another thing that you could do is so let's say your interview was a lot more structured and you were only allowed the questions at the end. At the end, what you want to do is you want to have a few of those intentional questions. So you want to think about them ahead of time, and just have it in your back pocket. Now, if there was a lot of back and forth between you and the person interviewing, you can say, gosh, we had such a great conversation, that you really answered all the questions that I had, because you actually had questions. You don't want to say, oh, you've answered all my questions when you never had any questions, because it does show that you're not as engaged, right? So that's just an example of it. You want the conversation to be as organic as possible. Don't force the questions. But the key thing you could do is pay attention. Pay attention to the person that's interviewing you, right? What are they talking about? And you can always circle back to ask a question. So, one thing that you had mentioned when we were talking, I didn't have a chance to ask you that question when you were talking about teamwork. What are some examples that you can provide me that your team does together as a blah, 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 right? So if teamwork is really important, if you work in a big team, what are some things your department does to kind of rally everyone together, to work together as a team? That's a really good question. For example, in my company, we do a lot of training. So you can always ask, one of the things I'm really interested in, draws me into this job, is your mentorship style. Can you tell me a little bit about your mentorship style or your coaching style or your training methods or your training style, right? And then that way you can show that you're interested in something, but really it's about the interviewer, right? And you paying attention to them, and you've got to like grab those little bits of information and put them in your pocket, so at the end you can have some questions, right? And it doesn't have to be like, I have to have 3 questions. You really don't have to have 3 questions. It just needs to feel like organic and not so forced. But in terms of good questions to ask to show engagement, 1, you have to say it, but 2, you just have to show it with the types of questions that are relevant for that position and that role. And what it does is it comes back to the first video on interview etiquette, doing your research, doing your research on that company. I cannot tell you how many times people don't really research. I am pretty much everywhere, kind of, sort of, in the hand therapy world. I'm on LinkedIn. I've got YouTube channels. I'm on the website. I've got my company. People apply to hands-on therapy services all the time and still are not aware of what I do. They're still not aware somehow of hand therapy secrets. It's not just therapists. I interview for other positions, and you would be surprised at the fact that no one goes and does the research that they need to do. And I cannot even tell you, I share my links like handing it on a platter, and people don't even go and take a moment to look. And I can promise you that when you don't do the research and you don't go back and take a look at those 7 etiquettes, it will make it really hard for you to be engaged in the interview process, to show that you really want it. It really does come back to that number 1, or do your research, right? And if you really want the job, you'll do it. And if you don't really want the job, well, then next interview, right? Maybe it wasn't meant to be for you because you're not interested. So I hope this 3 series of videos really helps you to land that job that you want, to become top choice for that position in hand therapy. People always tell me how hard it is to land a job in hand therapy, and there are jobs out there. There are companies, there are small clinics, medium-sized companies, and large-sized companies, hospitals looking for you. You just have to show up prepared to take that position. So if you need to know resumes, I'm gonna include those links below. How to get a job. There are resume videos, but if you did your resume and you're like, my resume looks good, but I keep, I'm not killing it in my interviews, then, definitely check out the first interview, 7 etiquettes, 7 tips on interview etiquettes, and then the follow-up video, and then this one, thanks for watching, on asking engaging questions to show your interest. So thanks so much for watching. Again, my name is Huang with Hand Therapy Secrets, and I really appreciate you watching this video. If you like videos like this and want to grow your career in hand therapy and increase your confidence, definitely consider subscribing to this channel. And if you liked it, hit the like button, and please consider sharing it to another therapist who could benefit from this, so that they can also land the job of their career and their dreams. All right, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Oh, leave me a comment. Leave me a comment if this helps you. Thanks.